You're setting out from Delhi to basically establish diplomatic ties with Afghanistan, a kingdom most Brits knew very little about back then.
Right, and it wasn't just popping over for a chat. We're talking a military-sized expedition.
Exactly. Cavalry, surveyors, even a surgeon dedicated to the mission. It's kind of incredible.
It really is.
So today we're doing our deep dive into this event. Mountstuart Elphinstone's mission to the Kingdom of Kabul, that's, modern Afghanistan and bits of Pakistan back in 1808 and 1809.
And what makes this deep dive so compelling, I think, is that we've got Elphinstone's own first-hand account.
Yeah, that's the key.
I mean, think how rare that is. A European perspective, nearly 2 centuries old, on a region so, well, different and remote at the time. It gives us this amazing window.
It really does. And for you, the learner, someone who wants to, get the essence of history, different cultures, quickly but thoroughly, without getting bogged down, this is perfect. We've gone through Elphinstone's, an account of the Kingdom of Kabul and Kit's, its dependencies, that's the primary source, and pulled out the most fascinating bits. It put you right there on the journey.
And the mission itself, it wasn't just exploring for the sake of it, was it?
No, not at all.
It was very strategic. The British government in India, they were getting worried about France, Napoleon's influence spreading in Asia.
Right. So connecting with the King of Kabul was seen as a pretty crucial move in that whole geopolitical game.
Absolutely. A buffer, perhaps, or at least an understanding.
And they didn't exactly go in quietly. They knew the Kabul court looked down on Europeans a bit, thought they weren't very important.
Yeah, that perception was definitely there.
So the instruction was, make it look impressive. Project great magnificence to, command some respect.
Which naturally meant a pretty big traveling party. Elphinstone wasn't just wandering off alone.
No way. He was leading a serious delegation. Okay, let's get a feel for the scale. You had Richard Stracey as secretary, running the admin side.
Right. Helped by Mr. Fraser and Mr. Rod Alexander.
Then surgeon Mr. McCordier, keeping everyone hopefully healthy. Captain Pittman, commanding the military escort.
And crucial for this kind of journey surveyors, Lieutenant McCartney and Lieutenant Tickle mapping the unknown.
And that wasn't even everyone, was it?
No, beyond that core group, you had more officers with the escort. Captain Raper, Lieutenants Harris, Cunningham, Ross, Irvine, Fitzgerald, and Jacob. A lot of names.
Wow. And the actual troops?
Well, the numbers.
Pretty substantial. 100 native cavalry, 200 infantry, plus another 100 irregular cavalry.
So 400 fighting men, plus all the support staff and diplomats. This wasn't a low-key visit.
Definitely not. More like a moving town almost. A show of presence, if not outright force.
And they set off from Delhi, October 13th, 1808.
Correct. The first 100 miles or so were through familiar territory, British-controlled land, until they reached Kanaund.
Elphinstone describes that bit as, sandy but still cultivated, manageable. But just past Kanaund, things change fast. That's where they hit the sandhills. He describes them really vividly, actually, like waves of a frozen ocean sculpted by the wind.
And difficult to travel through, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. Even on the established roads, he says the horses would sink knee-deep if they stepped just off the main track. A real taste of what was coming.
Yeah, sets the scene, doesn't it? So leaving Kanaund meant leaving British territory.
Exactly. They entered a district called Sheikh Chai, home to the Rusut tribe, who had a bit of a reputation for being, let's say, opportunistic.
Right, not necessarily friendly faces.
And the landscape just got more and more desert-like as they went.
So a couple days into Sheikh Chai, they reach a town called Singha, made of stone, apparently.
That's right. And there they meet the local chief, Raja Ubani Singh of the Shelhau tribe. Elphinstone gives quite the description.
Oh, yeah.
A small man, large eyes inflamed from, opium, and his beard was styled in this way that apparently made him look both mild and fierce at the same time. Quite a contradictory image.
Huh. And what was he like to deal with?
Elphinstone found his manners generally impolite, which he thought was typical for the area. But the Raja kept professing great respect for the British.
Ah, but you said he used opium.
Constantly, it seems. Elphinstone reckoned these declarations were probably, drug-induced, which makes you wonder how reliable any of it was.
Yeah, tricky diplomacy. And was he the only one?
Apparently not. Elphinstone noted that Shikha leaders generally were almost always intoxicated. Opium or brandy.
Seriously.
He basically said their window for doing any serious business was just that short time between sobering up and starting again.
Wow, that must have made things difficult.
Underlines the challenges, doesn't it? How do you build stable relations in that environment?
Okay, so where next after Singha?
Their next stop was Jula, and surprisingly, given they were in the desert, it sounded quite pleasant. Trees, gardens.
A bit of an oasis?
Perhaps. It was a meeting point for the 5 sheep chiefs, who all lived nearby in their own fortified places. Elphinstone met the other 4 there.
Any impressions?
He was struck by one in particular, Shyam Singh. Said he had this remarkably mild manner, especially compared to the others who seemed affected by opium. They were all cousins, apparently living quite peacefully together.
That sounds almost nice.
Well, that initial impression didn't last. Elphinstone found out later that not long after they left, Shyam Singh, the mild one, murdered the other 3 chiefs during a feast.
What? Seriously?
Yeah. A brutal reminder of just how unstable things could be. Violence could erupt really suddenly.
Okay, that's grim. So they move on from Jula, leaving Shikchi behind.
Correct. Another day and a half across sandy ground. Shikchi itself, the region, stretched about 80 miles north to south.
And what bordered it?
To the south, the huge territories of the Raja of Jaipur. East was British-controlled land. West was Bikaner.
Okay.
And northwest, you had these harsh lands belonging to the Bates tribe, notorious plunderers, apparently, who raided long distances on foot.
On foot. Wow.
And to the north was Haryana, famous for cattle, lions, and brave people. It had seen action involving George Thomas, a military adventurer, and was now under British authority.
Right. And Shikhchawadi itself, what was the land like?
Mostly flat, sandy, some rocky hills, not much water or cultivation, but it did have several decent-sized towns.
And the vegetation?
Sparse. Tufts of long grass, those distinctive ball, creel, and folk bushes. He mentions folk bushes, especially around the edges of the real desert.
Hinting at worse to come. And the local politics. These Shikhchawadis.
They owed tribute and military service to the Raja of Jaipur. He'd helped them take the land from the previous occupants. The Kiamkones converted Hindus not long before Elphinstone got there.
Interesting local history. Okay, so beyond Shikhchawadi.
They entered the territory of the Raja of Bikaner.
Right. And Elphinstone's assessment.
He thought this Raja was probably the least significant of the main Rajputana princes, resource-wise, especially compared to Jaipur and Jodhpur. Even Andapur, though declining, had more prestige because of its higher social rank among Rajputs.
But still, the Raja of Bikaner had some power.
Oh, yes. Despite a fairly low annual revenue, about £50,000, he could still muster a decent force. Around 2,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry, 35 artillery pieces. And this was after a recent defeat.
So not insignificant.
No. And what struck Elphinstone was this contrast. The government seemed quite poor overall, but the royal court itself was apparently run with impressive style and scale.
Interesting disconnect. What was their first main stop in Bikaner?
A town called Churu, considered the second biggest in the Raja's lands.
And the impression?
Quite handsome, actually, even though it was surrounded by barren sandhills. They used a lot of white limestone for the houses and walls, gave it a neat look.
The practical?
Maybe not entirely. He noted the limestone was quite soft, crumbled easily.
And the local chief there?
More like a dependent lord, Elphinstone thought, rather than a direct subject fully under the Raja's thumb.
Okay. So as they moved away from Shikhchawadi towards Bikaner city, Elphinstone starts talking about the real desert.
Yes. He basically says the land they'd crossed so far barely even qualified compared to what lay ahead. A massive 280-mile stretch between Bikaner's western edge and Bahawalpur.
280 miles.
And the last 100 miles of that stretch? Utterly empty, no people, no water, no vegetation, nothing.
Just nothing. That's hard to picture.
It really is. The first part, though, from the Shiksha border to a place called Pugal, about 180 miles, was this constant up and down through hills and valleys of deep, loose sand.
Those wave-like sandhills again.
Exactly. Ranging from 20 feet to maybe 100 feet high, like giant wind-formed waves. He mentions the locals saying they actually shifted with the wind.
Moving sand dunes.
Yeah, making summer travel especially dangerous because the landscape could literally change.
Wow. But even in winter, it wasn't totally lifeless.
No, surprisingly, there was hardy grass, those folk and thorny bushes again. Little bits of green scattered around.
And villages?
Yeah.
Any settlements in this?
Very occasionally. But incredibly basic. Just clusters of round straw huts, conical roofs, enclosed by thorny hedges. So dry, he said, a spark could burn one down in minutes.
Living on the edge. How do they survive?
Tiny fields relying on dew, not rain, grew poor quality pulse and this resilient plant called badger. Even that struggled, grew really sparsely.
And water must have been the biggest issue.
Absolutely critical. The wells were extraordinary. Some incredibly deep. He measured one at 345 feet.
345 feet. That's
And really narrow, some only 3 feet across. The water was always brackish, unhealthy, and scarce.
sick as hell.
He saw that 2 oxen working all night could empty a well. The little water they got was poured into simple clay reservoirs and drunk almost immediately.
So a constant struggle.
And they had clever ways to hide the wells, covering them with boards and sand. Vital defense against enemies, obviously.
Makes sense. Anything surprising out there?
Yes. Watermelons. Incredibly abundant, apparently, and huge, 3 or 4 feet around.
Watermelons in that desert.
Yeah, Elphinstone wasn't sure if they were wild or cultivated, but they were just scattered everywhere, like they grew completely untamed. A welcome sight, I imagine.
Definitely. What about the people living out there?
He noted a difference. The ordinary folk were small, dark, looked poor, but the upper classes were stouter, often handsome, with distinctive hooked noses. He calls them Jewish features, and their character.
Haughty, very lazy, and almost always high on opium, according to Elphinstone. Seems like a common theme.
Yeah.
And their animals.
Mostly sturdy oxen and lots of camels, used for everything, carrying loads, even pulling plows.
Right. And the wildlife. Did he mention much?
Oh, yes, quite a bit. Desert rats were everywhere. Small, but their burrows were a real problem for the horses.
Like prairie dogs, maybe?
Sort of squirrel-like, he says, with a tufted tail, and they sat upright. Also antelopes, and this creature called the gawker, a wild ass.
A wild ass.
Yeah, looked like a mule, very shy, incredibly fast. And foxes, too, smaller than British ones, with different coat colors.
So quite a bit of life, despite the harshness.
Definitely. But then the landscape changed again, didn't it?
Yes. After the sand, they hit this flat, hard clay plain, stretched for about 100 miles between Pugal and Bahawalpur.
And he mentions the sound, right?
Yeah, vivid description. Said it sounded like a board under the horse's hooves. Very different from the soft sand.
And vegetation here.
Yeah.
Even less.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Just occasional small sandy mounds with folk bushes, wild rue, and this plant called La'ana.
Lotta.
Resembled the everlasting flower, apparently, and when burned, it yielded a lot of alkali. Useful, I suppose. But apart from that, just flat, hard clay.
For 100 miles.
Yeah.
And almost completely empty. No water, no people. The only exceptions were the fort and pool at Mushkar and 2 wells about 16 miles before Bahawalpur. That's it.
And he thought they were on the best route.
Yeah, which makes the emptiness even more striking. Imagine what the rest was like.
Absolutely. Okay, traveling through that requires serious planning. Logistics must have been a nightmare.
Essential. Totally essential. Back at Karun, they had to hire 600 camels.
600. Just for supplies.
600 camels plus about a dozen elephants just to carry water and provisions for everyone.
Incredible. How did they carry the water?
A mix of things.
Yeah.
Leather bags, sheep, and oxen skins, which tended to leak or tear.
Not ideal.
No. And also 24 large copper vessels, originally made for Hindu travelers, apparently, but they proved much better, much more reliable.
And they need all that water just for the people and maybe horses.
Interestingly, their initial sums hadn't even really factored in the camels themselves. Maybe they just assumed camels could go forever without drinking, which they almost can, but still.
Shows the scale of the challenge. And how did the people cope? The ones traveling with the mission?
It took a toll, a psychological toll. The women and some servants were sent back from Churu, probably wise.
But even the men?
Oh, yeah. Desertions became a real problem. Men were leaving in groups of 20, 30 at a time. Just overwhelmed by fear of the desert, it seemed.
Understandable, really.
Yeah.
And what about security? You mentioned plunderers earlier.
Big concern. There was fighting going on in Bikner, plus the threat from tribes like the Booties, so they had to hire extra guards.
On top of the already large escort.
Yep, another 100 horsemen and 50-foot soldiers from the Saudi tribe, just to protect the baggage train.
And this changed how they traveled.
It did. Since Sheikh Jawadi, they'd mostly marched at night to avoid the heat.
Makes sense.
But the loading took hours. They'd start in the afternoon, but often wouldn't be ready to move until late.
So arriving late.
Very late. Often after midnight, sometimes not until dawn, even though the actual distance wasn't huge. Maybe 15 to 26 miles a day.
Why so slow and tiring then?
The sheer length of the column, up to 2 miles long. Winding paths around sandhills, often single file. Camels sinking in the sand. It was just exhausting, slow progress.
How did they even communicate along a 2-mile line?
Drums and trumpets to pass signals back and forth if there were delays or problems.
Resourceful. What about the foot soldiers? Walking in that sand sounds awful.
They made provisions. Half the infantry got camels to ride in turns, 2 men per camel.
That's something.
And they had special covered litters called kahas carried on camels for anyone who got sick.
Practicalities. And then there were burrs.
Oh, millions of them, clinging to everything, incredibly annoying for people and animals.
But useful.
Surprisingly, yes. The horses ate them. Apparently, people ate the seeds. Nothing wasted, I guess.
Nature finds a way. But all these hardships, bad water, exhaustion, led to health problems.
Serious ones, yeah. Especially among the native contingent. Bad water, fatigue, and maybe eating too many of those watermelons.
The watermelon strike back.
Seems like it. A low fever, often with severe dysentery, spread rapidly. At one point, 30 sepoys were ill in a single day.
That's bad. Any deaths?
Tragically, yes. During their stop in Bikaner, 40 people died from these illnesses.
40. That's a huge loss.
It is. And the big temperature swings, hot days, cold nights probably didn't help.
What about the Europeans?
They mostly fared better. Just a few cases of minor eye inflammation reported. Maybe better immunity or a different diet or just luck.
So despite all that, the desertions, the illness, the difficult terrain, they eventually reached Bikaner city.
They did. And the journey itself, that last stretch, was relatively quiet in terms of attacks. They saw plunderers a couple of times, but no major incidents.
Though some people got lost.
Sadly, yes. A few got separated for a day or two, faced dangers from the desert itself, and also got shot at by wary villagers who thought they were enemies. Trying to find their way back must have been terrifying.
Absolutely. So November 5th, they arrive at Bikaner. And the first impression?
Stunning. After all that desolation, suddenly seeing this seemingly huge, magnificent city rising out of the wilderness, imposing walls, towers.
Big impact.
Huge. He says there was even a debate about whether it was bigger than Delhi.
Really? Delhi.
Yeah. Though on closer look, maybe not quite that grand. The walls were high and well kept. Lots of towers, tall houses, temples, one with a really high spire. It looked impressive. But once inside the gates, a lot of it was simpler mud huts, painted red, which was typical. Still, very densely populated. Probably lots of refugees from the fighting nearby.
Ah, yes, the fighting. Bikaner was under siege, wasn't it?
It was, in a very tight spot, besieged by 5 different armies at the same time.
5?
Yep. One big force from the Raja of Jodhpur was camped just outside. Plus, predatory horsemen were cutting off all the supply routes from the countryside. Crucial for a city.
How did the Raja defend against that?
Oh, drastic strategy. He had all the wells filled in for 10 miles around the city.
Filled in the wells. Why?
To use the desert itself as his defense, create a resource-free zone so attackers couldn't sustain themselves. But of course, that made life very difficult for Elphinstone's mission trying to get water and supplies.
Yeah, I can imagine. How long were they stuck there?
11 days. They were relieved when they could finally move on, but while they were there, they saw some of the action.
Like what?
A heavily guarded convoy forcing its way into the city. And they saw the Raja's troops intercepting an enemy supply line nearby. Plunder, casualties, the works. Right near their camp.
Must have been tense. And politically tricky, too.
Very. Caught between the besieging general trying to pressure them and the Raja inside who controlled their access to supplies, he even temporarily cut off their access to their well.
A reminder of who held the power locally.
Exactly. A little diplomatic remonstration got it restored, but it showed their vulnerability.
And the ordinary people of Bikaner, how did they react to these foreigners?
Intense curiosity. Elphinstone says they were stared at constantly like prodigies.
What did the locals look like?
He describes their loose white cotton clothes, Rajput features, and these distinctive mitre-shaped turbans, often with a different color wrapped around the base.
Did the mission explore much outside the city?
They tried, but gave up quickly. The surrounding area was just utterly bleak and barren, nothing to see.
Right. Anything else notable about Bikaner city itself?
That incredibly deep well under the fort, 300 feet deep, 15 or 20 feet wide.
The noisy one.
That's the one. Used 4 huge buckets, worked by oxen, made a booming sound like a cannon every time the buckets hit the water. Must have echoed like crazy.
Memorable. And they met the Raja Surut Singh.
Yes, that took up a lot of their time. First, his ceremonial visit to their camp, then they visited his palace.
How did he arrive?
In a fancy coach-like thing with lots of attendants and ceremonial gear, mace bearers out front. He sat on a special embroidered cushion, a musnut under a canopy held up by silver pillars. Very grand.
And the conversation.
Covered a lot of ground. The king's age, English climate, Indian politics, Britain's relations with France. Elphinstone even got asked if their mission was because of the war with France.
Direct question.
Yeah, and as per custom, they exchanged formal presents before he left.
What was Elphinstone's personal impression of the Raja?
Tall, fair for an Indian, black whiskers, long nose, generally smiling. Looked pleasant enough.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There often is. Beneath the smile, he had a terrible reputation. Oppressive ruler, suspected of poisoning his older brother, definitely involved in murdering an agent from Hindustan. Yet, because he was very strict about religious rules, many of his people saw him as a saint.
Wow. That's quite the contradiction.
Fascinating, isn't it? Tyrant and saint.
So Elphinstone then visited the Raja's fort.
Yes, a few days later, invited by the Raja's infant son, apparently. The fort itself looked imposing, a bit jumbled, lots of towers and battlements.
And inside?
Up lots of stairs, into a courtyard, then a stone hall where the Raja received them, again under his fancy canopy.
What about the courtiers?
Elphinstone thought they looked fairer-skinned than usual for Hindustan, many with what he described as Jewish features. Very showy turbans. The Raja and his relatives wore turbans covered in jewels. He even rested his arms on a steel shield decorated with diamonds and rubies.
Serious bling.
Definitely projecting wealth and power.
Was the meeting formal the whole time?
Not entirely. The Raja led Elphinstone and a few key officers away from the heat and crowd to a smaller private apartment. Very neat, fine plasterwork, china satin curtains.
More intimate setting.
Yes. And it was there, sitting on the floor, Indian style, that the Raja suddenly declared his submission to the British. Even offered Elphinstone the keys to the fort.
Whoa, that's huge. What did Elphinstone do?
Politely but firmly refused. Very diplomatically handled, you have to assume.
Yeah, accepting would have massive implications. How did the visit end?
With entertainment by dancing women. Then they left.
Okay, so formalities done. They finally leave Bikaner.
Yes, on the night of November 16th. Under cover of darkness.
The journey continued. Similar terrain at first.
For the first couple of nights, yes. Still that difficult desert landscape. They were so exhausted after the second march, they planned a rest day.
Much needed, I imagine.
Absolutely. But plans changed. The Devorn, a Bikaner official, warned them about enemy movements. Partisans and predatory tribes were active.
So rest day canceled.
Canceled. They decided it was safer to travel by day for better visibility and protecting the baggage.
Makes sense. So an early start.
Very early. The beat to arms went at 2 a.m. on the 19th. But loading still took forever. It was full daylight before they got moving.
And they arrived.
After dark again. Reached Pugal after a punishing 24-mile march over those wavy sandhills. Most people were severely dehydrated, totally wiped out.
Pugal. Was there water there?
Thankfully, yes. A welcome relief. Plenty of good rainwater stored in vaulted reservoirs. And well water, too brackish, but usable, not harmful.
And the wells weren't as deep?
No, noticeably shallower than the Bikaner monsters.
Did Elphinstone look around Pugal?
He did during their brief stop, painted a pretty bleak picture. High sand hills, basic straw huts, a crumbling mud fort, just endless sand with no real vegetation. He wondered how people could possibly live there. A mix of awe and horror, really.
Sounds grim. When did they leave Pugal?
Dawn on the 21st. After about 10 or 12 miles more of sand, they hit the hard clay plain again.
Ah, the board-like ground.
That's the one. Instant change. Camels spread out. The whole caravan picked up speed. Must have felt exhilarating after slogging through the sand.
Relief. Any encounters that day?
Yes. They found a guy who was completely lost. He'd been tracking stolen camels, ran out of water, hadn't eaten for 2 days.
Poor fellow. Did they help him?
They did. Gave him food, a camel, helped him get back before nightfall.
Good deed. Anything else?
Later that day, a much more striking encounter. About 150 soldiers on camels.
More locals.
These were soldiers belonging to Bahawalpur, a governor for the king of Kabul from an eastern province.
What were they like?
Impressive. 2 men per camel, all carrying long matchlocks, advanced in good order, saluted the mission. Their camels looked really well trained.
And their commander.
Long beard, Persian-style tunic with gold buttons, low cap, rode a superb camel with a showy saddle and 2 reins through its nostrils. Looked the part.
Did they communicate?
Barely. Elphinstone said his language was almost unintelligible.
But they brought something important.
Vitally important. Water. 100 camels carrying 400 skins of water from a place called Magur, plus sealed brass jars of better drinking water from the Hephaestus River, bearing the king's seal.
Wow. A welcome delivery.
Extremely welcome. They camped soon after, about 26 miles from Pugal, feeling much better with the fresh water and the prospect of seeing new faces and places.
Right. What happened the next day? Heading towards Mountstuart.
A long, hot march, 30 miles, much of it in the afternoon heat, and during a halt on a featureless plain, the mirage.
Ah, the famous desert mirage.
A really convincing one. Looked like a long lake with islands. Some people were totally fooled, even though they knew about mirages. One of the surveyors actually started taking bearings on it.
That's how real it looked.
Apparently, Elphinstone observed it closely, said it wasn't like the usual heat haze in India. No visible vapor, just a perfect reflection of the ground, mud, sand, grass, bushes, making it look exactly like water.
Strange phenomenon. Did he figure out why?
Not really a scientific explanation, just noted it happened on flat, smooth, dry ground, and the sun's position didn't seem to matter, called it srab in Persian.
Interesting. So they push on to Mountstuart.
Yes, reached it as the sun was setting, saw its high walls, towers, a mosque, and a tomb with painted tiles, Persian style. Camped near the small, weak-looking fort after dark.
How long did they stay?
2 days to take on more water. Elphinstone noted the mix of people with Bahawalpur's group who'd joined them Hindus, and a Persian-looking mullah from Mountstuart. A diverse bunch.
And then, more marching.
Yep. On November 25th, a 27-mile march towards 2 wells further out, and another mirage, even more spectacular this time.
Another one.
Looked like a huge lake or a wide river, crystal clear water, even reflections of riders on its surface. Must have been incredibly deceptive.
Anything else on that march?
They passed a small, neat tower, told it was a refuge against raiding parties, and saw a few stunted mimosa bushes and one lone tree, still very sparse.
Okay. The next day, things finally changed properly.
Big change. After about 12 miles across low sandhills and clay patches, they saw trees on the horizon.
The sign they were waiting for.
Definitely. They picked up the pace. Then, a clear boundary. The desert just stopped. A long row of trees marked the edge.
And beyond.
Clumps of trees, green fields, wells with clear water, houses, signs of life and fertility everywhere.
Must have been an incredible relief.
Elphinstone says they were enchanted. Even low tamarisk trees looked beautiful after 5 weeks in the desert. Seeing a Persian wheel actively lifting water from a well was a highlight.
A symbol of life returning. Where did they head next?
They traveled for about 1.5 miles alongside the walls of Bahawal. The roads were packed with spectators.
Curious locals again.
Yes, and Elphinstone found them just as interesting. Very different from people east of the desert. Strong, dark, harsh features, long hair and beards, wearing caps instead of turbans. And their language was completely unintelligible.
Any outside influences?
He noticed the better-off people showed Persian influence in their dress and manners.
And then their river.
Finally, crossed a small canal, some fields, and reached the banks of the Hyphasis, the Sutlej.
Was it impressive?
He admits to being a little disappointed by its width and the look of the banks. But the historical significance hit him, knowing Alexander the Great's fleet had sailed that very river. That was powerful.
Yeah, connects you right back through history. So they've arrived in Baharul Khan's territory. How was the reception?
Excellent. Baharul Khan himself arrived the next day, having ridden 40 miles just to greet them personally.
That's quite an effort.
And Elphinstone stresses how consistently kind and hospitable the Khan was from the moment they neared his lands until well after they'd crossed the Indus later on. Really went above and beyond.
Do they have to negotiate presents, like with the Raja of Bikaner?
They expected to, but no. The Khan seemed more eager to show his own generosity.
How so?
He sent lavish gifts straight away. Sheep, flowers, sweetmeats, oranges, nuts, raisins, and a big sum of money just for the mission's servants.
Generous indeed.
So much so that Elphinstone felt a bit embarrassed initially and insisted on giving a similar amount to the Khan's staff in return.
Fair enough. Did they meet informally?
Yes. Mr. Stretchy and Captain Raper visited him first and were apparently quite charmed. The Khan praised the king of Kabul highly.
But admitted he'd never met him.
Right. Said he was afraid of the snows near Kabul and felt he was just a humble desert dweller, not worthy of meeting the king.
Interesting self-perception. Did the Khan visit Elphinstone?
He did on December 1st. Came to Elphinstone's tent, described as plain, open, pleasant man, maybe late 40s or 50s, simple white tunic, but a gold-braided mantle, brocade cap, silk turban. His attendants stood respectfully while they chatted about India and England.
Elphinstone returned the visit.
The next day, Through streets crowded with silent, respectful onlookers on the ground and rooftops, the Khan received them in a handsome room, attic windows, Persian carpet.
How was the conversation this time?
Very free and open. He repeated again he had no desire to go see the king, said he loved the desert life, hunting, showed off a locally made clock and a really good gun lock made in Bahawalpur.
Local craftsmanship.
Yes. And more gifts when they left. Hunting hawks, greyhounds, 2 nice horses, one Marwari with gold trim, the other with enameled gear, an enameled matchlock rifle with an English powder flask, and trays of local cloths.
He really was generous.
Extremely. They had one final meeting in a tent near their camp while the baggage crossed the river. The Khan introduced the clockmaker, some religious scholars, ulma, then had a private chat with Elphinstone and Stretchy, offering advice and information. Said he hoped they'd remember him.
Sounds like they definitely would.
Elphinstone writes, they left with real regret. Impressed by his liberality, kindness, sincerity, found him genuinely agreeable.
Did they see much of Bahawalpur town itself?
Yes, they explored it. About 4 miles around, mango gardens inside the walls, mostly unburnt brick houses, mud city wall, famous for silk girdles and turbans.
And the people?
Mainly Jutes and Balowis, both Muslim groups. More Hindus there than in other provinces they'd seen. Afghans were considered foreigners there.
Okay. What about the area right by the river, the Hyphosis?
Fertile, lots of silt deposits, but often very soft ground, hard to ride on. Mix of cultivated land and low tamarisk copses full of wild boar, hog, deer, game birds. River itself was winding, muddy looking, but the water was excellent once settled. Locally, they called the river system the Gar, the combined Hyphosis-Baya and Takht-e-Sulaiman.
Got it. So December 5th, they leave the Hyphosis behind and head for Multan.
That's the plan. About 70 miles west, they reached Multan on the 11th.
What was the landscape like on that stretch?
After the first few miles, mostly dry, sandy, not much grass, but lots of villages surrounded by well-tended fields, wheat, cotton, turnips, and surprisingly many large, deep watercourses crossing the land.
And more camels arrived.
Yes, before they reached Multan, 25 camels sent by Bahawal Khan caught up with them.
The Khan's famous camels.
The very ones. Renowned for strength and endurance, perfect for the desert, he used them for hunting. Elphinstone mentions meeting an old Bikaner minister who'd ridden 175 miles in just 3 days.
Incredible speed.
Yeah, some of the mission members apparently got quite into riding these camels for pleasure after that, even after crossing the Indus.
So, Multan, a major city.
Oh, yes. Big place. About 4.5 miles in circumference. Strong, high wall, 40-50 feet with towers, a citadel on higher ground inside, and these magnificent tombs with high, painted tile cupolas visible from far away.
Known for anything in particular?
Silks and carpets, though Elphinstone thought the carpets weren't as good as Persian ones.
In the area immediately around Multan.
Pleasing. Fertile, well-cultivated, lots of wells for irrigation. People look similar to Bahawalpur, but with more individuals, especially horsemen, who looked Persian.
How long did they stay in Multan?
Quite a while, 19 days.
19 days. Why so long?
A few reasons. They went out shooting, hunting, hawking frequently, which let them observe the area well.
What did they see?
Flat land, excellent soil. But also signs of decay, ruined villages nearby. Still, about half the land was well cultivated using Persian wheels. Wheat, millet, cotton, turnips, carrots, indigo. Trees like neem, date, peepal.
And uncultivated areas.
Near the river, thick tamarisk copsewood. Further out, mostly bare with scattered grass and date trees, lots of game. And the weather was lovely cool nights, slight frost, warm days.
Sounds nice. But why the long stay? Practical reasons.
Yes, several key things. Needed to buy or hire more camels. Gather intelligence on where exactly the king of Kabul was, wait for a royal memandar, an official host, exchange their Hindustan camels for local ones better suited for the next stage, make warmer clothes for the sepoys, and get horses for their attendants. A lot of logistics.
Right, a major refitting stop. And they met the governor there.
Yes, Nabob Saraf Rakeh, an Afghan family, but settled in Multan so long they'd lost many Afghan traits.
How did he react to the mission arriving?
He apparently panicked, shut the city gates, restricted entry, doubled the guards, debated what the British were really up to, seemed very suspicious.
But he agreed to meet them.
Eventually. On December 15th, a big tent was set up. Mr. Stretchy went to greet him. The Nabob arrived on a white horse with gold trappings, big escort, officers, standards.
Sounds impressive.
The procession to the tent was chaos, though. Dust, crowds fighting, people getting ridden down. Mr. Stretchy's horse nearly got trampled.
Not a smooth arrival.
Not at all. They missed the path to the tent, cavalry rushed forward, servants got swept away, decorative screens torn down, tent ropes pulled out, just mayhem.
And inside the tent.
Crowded, dark. The governor sat only briefly, nervously telling his prayer beads, just repeating, "You are welcome." Then he bolted, saying the crowd outside was too unruly.
Didn't make a great impression then. What did he look like?
Good-looking young man, Persian dress, spoke good Persian. His Afghan attendants were large, fair, handsome, but looked disorganized compared to Persians.
Did they meet him again under better circumstances?
Yes, Elphinstone visited him later that evening. Found him under an awning on a garden terrace with a large, now well-ordered group. The nabob was much more civil and agreeable this time.
Okay, that's better. Any other important visitors in Multan?
Mullah Jaffa Sistani, the king's deputy and newswriter, and others.
And that strange incident with the governor's uncle.
Ah, yes, Sakun Khan invited Elphinstone boar hunting. Elphinstone declined politely, sent a couple of small gifts instead.
Too dead courtesy.
2 days later, Sakun Khan sends the gifts back and asks for the horse he'd offered for the hunt back too. Apparently, he got scared someone would accuse him of plotting with the English.
Paranoia running high.
Reflects the political tension, definitely.
Okay, so after 19 days, they finally leave Multan. Where to next?
First, they moved camp on December 16th, closer to the river the Asus, or Chenab, as it was called there, already joined by the Hyastes and Hydrutes.
Preparing to cross.
Exactly. They started crossing on the 21st, though the baggage took several days before that. Camped about 3 miles from the right bank once across.
And a significant sight from there.
Their first proper view of the Afghan mountains to the west, part of the Sulaiman range, estimated 70-80 miles away from Multan. A glimpse of the goal.
Must have been exciting. When did they start moving again?
Resumed the march on December 29th. Their immediate task was crossing the little desert between the Hyastes, Chenab, and the Indus.
Another desert.
A smaller one. The main desert ran north-south for hundreds of miles, but this section between the two rivers was narrower. Took them 2 marches. Basically, the bit of land between the rivers that didn't flood.
What was it like?
Similar boundary, marking the edge of cultivation. Sand hills, stunted bushes, burrs, folk bushes again. Still had to carry fodder for the animals. The sand hills were smaller and grayer than the main desert's reddish-yellow ones. Found brackish water after the second day.
So by New Year's Eve, 1808, they're approaching the Indus itself.
Yes, by morning December 31st, they were within its flood zone. Elphinstone, McCartney, and Stretchy rode ahead with a guide and escort to see the river itself.
What was the land like near the Indus?
Rich soil, long grass, willow-like trees, some cultivation. It was a cloudy day, cold wind, but they got a clear view west. 3 distinct mountain ranges, maybe even higher ones beyond. Clouds obscured the tops initially.
And the mountains?
Dramatic cloud formations, a solid line along the middle range. The next day, they saw fresh snow on the upper slopes.
And the Indus, finally seeing the great river.
Huge anticipation. Elphinstone calls it a noble object, the size, the backdrop of mountains. A little disappointed initially because an island split the view, but still deep and fast-flowing near their bank. A major milestone reached.
Did they learn anything from locals there?
Talked to a local man and their guide. Learned about the Balua tribe on the far bank and the fierce Kironis in the mountains beyond. Interestingly, names of tribes in places further west, even ones on their maps, meant nothing to these locals.
Just the unknown.
Pretty much. The general idea was just beyond the hills lies something wild, strange, and new. Adds to the sense of venturing into the truly unknown.
Okay, describe the land right along the Indus there. The strip between the river and the desert.
A narrow tract, about 75 miles long between Ududakot and the Kahari ferry crossing, constantly fought over by the river changing course and the desert encroaching.
Tricky ground.
Could be. Go too far west, you hit river branches, quicksand, dense tamarisks, and reeds. Too far east, you're back in the sand hills. But the strip itself was carefully cultivated in many parts.
What crops?
Good yields of wheat, barley, turnips, cotton. Fields enclosed with thorn hedges, willow hurdles, or reed mats. Houses often built of the same stuff.
How do the farms look?
Neater than in Hindustan, Elphinstone thought. Regular enclosures, gates, sheds. They saw people using hand mills, feeding turnips to oxen. Practical farming.
And protection from floods.
Houses near the river were often built on high platforms. The Indus could flood 20, 24 miles inland sometimes.
Wow. What about the people living in this river strip?
Remarkably civil and well-behaved, he notes, features more pleasing than in Bahawalpur or Multan, and appearance improved as they went north, better complexions.
Clothing, too.
Yes, got better further north. Even in the south, men wore long white or blue cotton gowns, looked a bit like Mulvis, the scholars. Further north, brown-gray woolen coats became common, eventually replaced by colorful clothes, red or checks, and quilted silk caps instead of turbans. Elphinstone didn't think the caps looked very handsome, though.
Personal taste. Where did they usually stop?
Larger villages, including Laya, a poor provincial capital, only about 500 houses, lots of tombs visible along the way.
And he scanned out.
Muhammad Rawn's tomb at a village named after him. Octagonal, painted tiles, corner minarets, quite prominent. They also saw a high bank north of Laya, thought to be the old eastern bank of the Indus from long ago.
The river moved that much.
Seems so. Rivers change course.
Did they get more official visitors as they moved north?
At Laya, 2 Dani horsemen sent by the provincial governor arrived, dressed in red fur-lined mantles, one fair with a silk turban, the other darker with a sheepskin cap. Contrasting looks.
Anyone else?
A Persian attendant of the king, and a young Hindu guy, brother of a local Dewan, dressed like a Durrani Afghan.
And these visitors, were they open?
Surprisingly so. Elphinstone was struck by how freely everyone talked about the government, the civil wars. Seems like freedom of speech wasn't a major issue there.
Interesting. And the general population's reaction? Still curious.
Immensely. Horsemen joined their march just to look. Villagers approached their camps, often on mares with foals carrying spears. But always civil, he emphasizes.
What did people think the mission was?
All sorts of wild ideas. Some thought they were Sayyids, descendants of the Prophet, or Mughals, or Afghans, even Hindus. Rumors flew about them carrying huge cannons and trunks, having exploding boxes, raising the dead.
Raising the dead.
And that story about the animated wooden ram back in Multan, just extraordinary beliefs circulating.
Shows how alien they must have seemed.
Yeah.
Any other encounters before crossing the Indus?
At the ferry, they met some sick merchants. They'd been to Draban for some kind of matter, unclear what. They gave a generally positive report about treatment by Afghan tribes. Except the Vizier tribe. Called them savage and repeated the rumor that they ate human flesh.
Yikes. Whether true or not, a scary reputation.
Yeah.
So time to cross the Indus.
Yes, at the Kahari ferry on January 7th.
How wide was it there?
Impressive. Mainstream was over 1,000 yards, plus a 250-yard branch and other smaller streams. Took serious crossing.
How did they do it?
Flat-bottom boats, big ones, 30-40-ton capacity. They literally threw the camels into the boats. Horses went in boats, too.
And the elephants.
They swam across. Apparently, this amazed the locals.
I bet. Okay, cross the Indus. On the West Bank now. Journey to Dera Ismail Khan.
About 35 miles. Through thickets of long grass, thorny shrubs, lots of game animals. Land looked fertile, plenty of water, but cultivation wasn't very extensive, though flourishing where it existed.
When did they arrive?
January 11th. Met by Fut Khan, the local governor acting for Muhammad Khan.
Impressed him.
Fut Khan was splendidly dressed, but his escort looked poorly equipped. He boasted a lot about his master's forts, cannons, blacksmiths.
Gifts exchanged.
Yes, Fut Khan sent some Kabul wine, 6 bottles, and 2 bottles of bedmish, musk willow essence.
An interesting local product. How long in Dera Ismail Khan?
Nearly a month. Waiting for a royal mimandar.
A long wait. What was the town like?
Located in a date palm wood near the Indus, ruinous, unburnt brick wall about 1.5 miles around. Inhabitants mainly Bahawis, some Afghans, some Hindus with a temple.
And the people nearby.
The country folk, Bahawis and Jews, looked similar to those across the river. They saw many Afghans from the Daman region, too.
What were they like?
Large, bony, long, coarse hair, loose turbans, sheepskin cloaks. Plain but pleasing manners, Elphinstone thought. Horsemen often came to observe the mission camp. Curious visitors dropped by.
Did they explore while waiting?
Yes. They visited a camp of the Coats tribe, considered one of the rudest pastoral groups.
Where's the camp?
Out on a vast plain, hard mud, scattered john and call bushes, looked like rich land but neglected.
What do they see there?
Afghan shepherds with camels, including a striking white one with blue eyes. Communication was hard. They didn't speak Persian or Hindustani much, but they were civil, showed their swords.
What was the camp itself like?
Circular. Coarse, brown blanket tents held up by poles. Thorny walls for protection. Their arrival caused quite a stir. One man who'd been to India asked them what they were doing there, what they had.
Suspicious.
No. Elphinstone says the interaction was easy, friendly, good-humored, civil. Most spoke Pashto. Lots of kids, incredibly numerous, mostly fair and handsome. Girls had aquiline noses, Jewish features again.
And the men?
Varied. Some dark, some fair, like an Irish haymaker, he says. High noses, generally short. Some wore brown wool coats, most white cotton turbans. Very dirty, though. Curious, but not suspicious, especially about the mission's women.
Where were these shepherds usually from?
They'd been there 3 months, would go back to Ghuzni area for summer. Said Ghuzni was much better than Daman. Communication remained difficult, though.
Fascinating glimpse into nomadic life. Any other expeditions from Dera?
Yes, Mr. Fraser and Lieutenant Harris tried to climb Takht-e-Sulaman's throne mountain.
The one linked to Noah's Ark.
That's the legend. 2-day march across a plain to Draban, main town of the Mayang Kyle tribe. Neat town by a stream.
Reception there.
Kindly received by the chief's brother. Fair, good-looking, bit rude but interesting clothes. Carried a bow, quiver, offered them dinner. Then the chief himself, Omar Khan, visited.
What was he like?
Uncommonly handsome, fair, under 30, black shawl, turban, light blue cloak. Pleasing manners, dignified, but stressed about tribal conflicts. Asked them for advice, even a talisman.
Did they run into trouble there?
An incident at Draban. Their Hindustani horsemen got mobbed. One was hit with a sword by a guy from the Solomon Seal tribe. Reason unknown language barrier again. Omar Khan spoke some Persian, a few mullahs knew some words, but generally hard to communicate.
Did Omar Khan let them try climbing the mountain?
He tried to dissuade them, said it was dangerous, but eventually provided safeguards from the Kaironis tribe who lived on the mountain. Advised them to disguise themselves as locals, leave their Indian servants behind.
Smart advice. How was the climb?
Entered the hills, north side slope, fir trees, rocks, valleys with brooks. But progress was slow. After 12 miles, still 3 days from the top. And then they heard the upper part was inaccessible due to snow.
So they turned back.
Yes, that plus the main mission was about to leave Dera. Spent a night in a low Chiron village, poor bread and meat, lit the place with burning turpentine-rich wood, returned to Draban, exchanged gifts with Omar Khan and his brother.
They thought highly of Omar Khan.
Very. Praised his kindness. Also noted hospitality from a rival leader. But the return wasn't smooth either.
Ambushed.
Yes. 7 horsemen, led by Omar Khan's nephew. Spears out.
Oh dear. What happened?
Their guide, provided by Omar Khan, talked the nephew out of robbing them. Phew. But then, another scare.
What now?
A man on foot took aim at Mr. Harris with a matchlock. Guide intervened again. They got back to camp safely. Close calls.
Very close. But they still showed hospitality later.
Yes, people from Draban visited their camp later and were treated well. Shows a complex relationship, perhaps.
Okay, so finally, news arrives about the king. End of January.
Yes, word from Muhammad Khan. The king was definitely heading to Peshawar, and Mullah Jaffa Sistani would join them as their official escort or guide.
Mullah Jaffa. Who was he again?
Rose from schoolmaster to courtier and merchant, got into the king's favor by helping him out financially, maybe. Still kept a merchant style, but was influential.
Personality.
Grave, shrewd, sensible, good-humored mostly, but could be blunt, passionate sometimes. He joined them after couriers confirmed everything.
So preparations for the final leg towards Peshawar.
Exactly. They finally departed Dera Ismail Khan on February 7th.
Where did the route take them first?
Initially through thick vegetation along the Indus riverside.
And then another encounter.
A significant one. About 100 horsemen, clearly Persian or Durrani style, sent by the king himself, drawn up across their path. They carried a letter for Elphinstone.
What did they look like?
Persian clothes, boots, low sheepskin caps, leopard skin saddlecloths, Persian swords, matchlocks, some short blunderbusses, small, light horses, looked neat and orderly.
A proper royal escort. Did they bring anything else?
Yes, a royal gift. 20 mule loads of fruit from Kabul, apples, grapes, things like that.
Nice touch. And a formal ceremony followed.
That evening, yes, in a tent near camp, to receive a dress of honor from the king.
What did that involve?
Tent filled with local VIPs showing great respect, as if the king was there. Elphinstone was told to bow to the dress. Then he was formally robed in a large gold cloth garment, supposedly one the king himself had worn.
Wow. Anything else?
A shawl for his hat with the king's letter tucked into it. Another shawl for a girdle. A short prayer was said. The robe was very rich. The shawls very expensive. A major symbolic gesture.
Definitely signifies acceptance, or at least acknowledgement. Where did they head the next day?
Journeyed through similar country, reached sandy ground again, then the village of Bahawalpur, nearly as big as Dera, arrived after heavy overnight rain.
In the mountains.
Spectacular view at daybreak. The Sulaiman Mountains, often hidden by haze before, were now crystal clear thanks to the rain. Fresh snow on top, seemed higher, nearer. Stunning splendor, Elphinstone writes.
Must have been breathtaking. Where next?
Marched over sand toward scattered hills, camped near Punyala.
Describe Punyala.
A cheerful, beautiful sandy valley, bordered by craggy hills, watered by a stream, date palms, green corn patches, picturesque. The village itself was in a deep date grove on a hillside, streams gushing nearby. Inhabitants were Belia and sheikhs of supposed Arabian descent.
Sounds idyllic. But trouble occurred there.
Unfortunately, yes. Some of the mission's people were robbed and even taken prisoner by the villagers.
Seriously, what happened?
It was eventually sorted out, compensation paid, they hired a local safeguard, but they still lost some camels, and some stragglers got robbed even after they left. Not entirely friendly.
A reminder of the dangers. After Punyala.
40 miles up the valley of Laya. Dry and sandy, even though near the Indus. Had to carry water again. Saw Afghan shepherd camps along the way.
And after the valley.
Arrived in a rich, beautiful plain, about 35 miles across, ringed by mountains with the Indus dividing it. They camped on the Kurum River, shallow then, but wide. Gets deep and fast in summer, they were told.
And crossing this plain.
Took 3 marches. Belonged to the Takht-e-Sulaiman tribe. Naturally fertile land, highly cultivated irrigation canals. Looked productive.
What about the Takht-e-Sulaiman people?
Swarthier than expected, Elphinstone thought. Looked more Indian than Persian, but distinct. Long, thick hair, beards, loose turbans, independent air.
Reputation.
Known as robbers. And indeed, some mission camels and royal horses were stolen there, but generally they were civil to the main party. Elphinstone was surprised by their simplicity and equality, though even their chief dressed plainly, despite the tribe being quite wealthy. Okay, so that brings us towards the end of this leg of the journey. As we wrap up this part of our deep dive into Elphinstone's mission, what really stands out?
Well, for me, it's the sheer contrast. The incredible hardship of the desert, the thirst, the fear, juxtaposed with moments of amazing hospitality, like from Bahawalpur.
Right. And the incredible diversity. Different landscapes, radically different tribes and cultures, shifting political sands everywhere they went. It's a snapshot of a really complex region at a specific moment in time.
Definitely. And that aha moment for me, thinking about you, the learner, is probably just the resilience needed, not just by the mission, but by the people living there permanently.
Finding water 300 feet down, hiding wells, surviving in that heat and sand, the politics. It's just human tenacity on display. Elphinstone's detailed observations make it so vivid.
Yeah, those details are key. And thinking about relevance today, it's a reminder of what exploration and cross-cultural encounters involve before, instant communication and easy travel.
Absolutely. The challenges were immense. But the core themes navigating unfamiliar societies, dealing with suspicion and welcome, the political maneuvering, those still resonate, don't they? Understanding these historical journeys gives perspective on our own interconnected but still complex world.
It really does. So maybe a final thought to leave you with. How much has globalization really changed our fundamental understanding of places that seem remote or different?
And despite all the technology, what parts of Elphinstone's story, the mix of danger and kindness, the misunderstandings, the unexpected connections, might still reflect encounters between cultures today? It makes you think about what's truly changed and what aspects of human nature, history, and landscape endure,